here anymore, the way they act, but I'm glad he's coming. Take care of every problem, trouble, because when we see him, we're going to be like him. We're going to have that new body, that new mindset. Hey, we're going to be just like Jesus. Got something to look forward to. Does the Lord excite us a little bit when we get to go to heaven? People used to talk about heaven, they get excited about it. Don't see much of that anymore, but I got a good friend preacher who says all the time, we really get to go. You know, if we're saved, we really get to go to heaven. That ought to excite us this morning. Got your Bible, turn to the book of Jonah. Book of Jonah, chapter number 1. I want you to pray for us this morning. Lord, help us just a little while here today. We need his touch this morning. Book of Jonah, chapter number 1. Real familiar story. Jonah's a story, I guess most of the children learned it. One of the first stories they learned a whole lot in Sunday school. Should be familiar with this morning. Book of Jonah, chapter number 1. We'll read down through this whole chapter real quick. It'll take just a minute. Jonah, chapter number 1. Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it. For their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee into Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it, and go with them into Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. Then the mariners were afraid, and cried every man unto his God, and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea, to lighten it of them. But Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he lay and was fast asleep. So the shipmaster came to him and said unto him, What meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise, call upon thy God, if thou so be that God will think upon us that we perish not. And they said every one to his fellow, Come and let us cast lots, that we may know for who this cause this evil is upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell upon Jonah. Then said they unto him, Tell us, we pray thee, for whose cause this evil is upon us. What is then thine occupation? And whence comest thou? What is thy country? And of what people art thou? And he said unto them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which hath made the sea and the dry land. Then were the men exceedingly afraid, and said unto him, Why hast thou done this? For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then said they unto him, What shall we do unto thee, that the sea may be calm unto us? For the sea rolled and was tempest. And he said unto them, Take me up, and cast me forth into the sea. So shall the sea be calm unto you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. Nevertheless the men rowed hard to bring it to land, but they could not, for the sea rolled and was tempest against them. Wherefore they cried unto the Lord, and said, We beseech thee, O Lord, we beseech thee, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not upon us innocent blood, for thou, O Lord, hast done and pleased thee. So they took up Jonah, and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice unto the Lord, and made vows. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now I want you to look at chapter 3, just one verse, the first verse in chapter 3. And the Bible said, The word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time, saying. Now I want you to keep that verse right there in chapter number 3 in your mind for just a minute. He talked about coming to Jonah the second time. And we said as we started, everybody in the building pretty much this morning probably knows the story of Jonah. You see in chapter 1 how that God had told Jonah to go down to Nineveh and cry against it. Nineveh was a wicked place. They were against God. And God picked a man out by the name of Jonah. And you know, God don't pick anybody out, I believe, unless he knows he can use them. And he knew Jonah was a man that probably had a backbone that would go down there and preach to these people, tell them the truth, and cry out against them. But if you'll notice, Jonah done something like a lot of us good Baptists do a lot of times. Jonah seemed to know a better way than God did. Jonah pretty much looked at God and everybody around him and said, I know a better way. I'm going to do this a little bit different than what God told me to do. Jonah said, I'm not going to go to Nineveh. I'm going to go down to Tarshish. Did you find there in chapter 1 how that Jonah went and paid the fare, got on a boat? And you know, Jonah does a lot like we do a lot of times. He got on the wrong boat. And you know, if you ain't real careful, if we do like Jonah does a whole lot, we get on the wrong boat. And we begin to rebel against God, and before we know it, we got a storm. Hey, Jonah didn't realize what was going to happen when he got on that ship. He rebelled against God. God brought a great storm out there in the ocean. And there was a lot of other men on this ship with Jonah. These men became scared. They became afraid. And they began to look at Jonah. They cast lots and everything to try to figure out who was bringing this storm upon. And Jonah pretty much looks at them and says, it's me. Jonah went down in that ship, went to sleep. This storm came. They woke him up. And these men began to look at Jonah and say, why is this happening? Why did you bring this storm upon us? And Jonah realizes, I done something. I sinned against God. I'm not doing what God wanted me to do. So Jonah looks at the men pretty much and says, well, just go ahead and cast me overboard. These men didn't want to do that to begin with, but the storm got worse and worse at that time. And Jonah looks at them and says, you ain't got any choice but to cast me overboard. So these men cast Jonah overboard. They throw him into the ocean. The storm begins to cease. You know, I was thinking we got a lot of people, man, that's just like Jonah. They want to run from God. They never want to get right with God. And you know, a lot of these folks, if they ain't careful, man, they're going to get thrown overboard like Jonah did. Hey, God had a plan for Jonah's life, though. You look in verse number 3, all this has went on in Jonah's life. And the Bible said in chapter number 3 and verse number 1, the Bible said, and the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time, saying, arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. I want you to get a hold of what there in chapter 3, what verse number 1 said. It said, and the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time. Now here's a man that's backslid on God. He's bucking God on what God's telling him to do. He's going against God's will. God told him to do something, but God had to take this man out to the woodshed. Hey, Jonah's been thrown overboard, but God had a plan. He prepared a great fish according to this Bible. Prepared a fish. And I know this goes against a lot of what people want to believe in this day and time about Jonah, but God prepared a great fish. New Testament said it was a whale. God had this man swallowed up down there, kept him down there 3 days and 3 nights. But the Bible said there in chapter 3 and verse number 1, talking about God came to Noah the second time. And that's what I want to preach on a little while this morning, is the God of another chance. Hey, God give Jonah another chance right here in chapter number 3. And I said the God of another chance. That word chance means a favorable opportunity. Ain't you glad this morning God's given us another chance to come to the house of God? Right. Hey, we've got a favorable opportunity here this morning. I thought we was coming out the road this morning. Man, God's given us another chance to come out to the house of God to worship Him. He's given maybe a lost person another chance to come out to the house of God once again and get saved. We've got a favorable opportunity here this morning. You know, He's a God of another chance. You know, God used this whale, and you look in places, in other places in the Bible, God used strange messengers a lot of times to give people another chance. Right. Remember a man by the name of Balaam in the Old Testament? You remember God had to use something strange and unusual to get a hold of Balaam. Remember, he was a man that but God went against God, and God took a plain little old donkey and let that donkey preach to that man by the name of Balaam. Hey, he talked to him, he preached to him. And something that may be a little more strange, hey, old Balaam even talked back to him. Hey, God put this man in a strange and unusual place to get a hold of him. Hey, you better be careful a lot of times if you run from God, you'll wind up in some crazy places. And God will have to do some crazy things sometimes, seems like, to get a hold of you. Now look at Jonah. He wound up in the belly of a fish right here. The New Testament said it was a whale. And while he was down in that whale's belly, Jonah began to cry out to God. He began to cry out to God for him to give him direction. He began to cry out to God to have mercy upon him. Hey, God sent this fish, maybe an unusual thing, swallowed up Jonah, but he got Jonah's attention. Jonah was going to have a second chance because God needed him in chapter number 3 to go preach the gospel. Ain't you glad we serve a God this morning, a God of another chance? Man, a God that will give us a favorable opportunity this morning. You know, God's give us another chance to come out to the house of God and break all ties with the world this morning. Hey, God's give us another chance this morning to come in and get close to Him. You know, God's give us another chance if we're saved this morning to pull up and get as close to Him as we can get. Hey, we've got a favorable opportunity right here this morning that we take for granted a lot of times. You know, there may be somebody in the building lost this morning. Hey, God's given you another opportunity, a favorable chance this morning to hear the preaching of the gospel. Man, I hear some people say, well, I've made it this far. I'll come back again. I'll come back the next service or the next service. Hey, man, you ain't got no promises. You may be in the grave by sunset this evening. Hey, man, we've got a favorable opportunity this morning. You look at old Jonah, what God had to do to get through to Jonah. But He's a God of a second chance this morning, a God of another chance. God gave Jonah another chance, and if you'll study your Bible, man, you know Jonah run all the way to Nineveh. What was it, said like a 3-day journey or something? He made it in one day. God got a hold of him so much. Hey, I want to look at some folks, some people this morning in this book that God give another chance. You know, we write people off a lot of times, think they've done too much. They went too far in sin. Well, they went over the edge. And, you know, we forget about people a lot of times and just mark them off. But, man, there's people in this Bible that done a lot of wicked things, went against God. But God come walking in His grace and mercy and say, I'm going to give you another chance. Man, I'm glad every time He's given me another chance. I'm glad these times, man, He could have let me just die and forgot about me. But He pulled up to me and said, I love you just the way you are, and I'm going to give you another chance. Hey, man, we take things like that for granted. Hey, you can go all the way back over to the book of Genesis in the beginning over there. You look at the first 2 people that God created and put upon this earth by the name of Adam and Eve. Hey, they was the first man and woman that God ever created, put them in the Garden of Eden. Hey, they was in a perfect place, a great environment. Hey, they had it made in the Garden of Eden. God put them there just to tend that garden. Hey, to begin with, there was no evil influence. The devil wasn't nowhere around. But you know, eventually he walked up and lied to Eve one day. Hey, you look at the devil, he's a liar and the father of it. Right. Hey, you want to see who began to change the Bible to begin with the Word of God? It was the devil. Hey, he told Eve over there she wouldn't die if she ate of the fruit. That was the first lie. That's the first time the Bible had been changed. And hey, they've been trying to change it ever since then. Hey, man wants it to change to fit his position, to fit his feelings. And that's what's the matter with a lot of our churches today. We've changed this book so much, went man's direction and let man influence everything. But you look at Adam and Eve right here in the Garden of Eden. Hey, they was in a perfect place, a perfect environment. And you know, you look this day and time, you see the government, you see a lot of counselors, a lot of different people. They try to blame you. You look at somebody sitting in the courthouse being tried for something, and they want to blame it on their environment, how they was raised and stuff such as that. They'll want to look and point fingers at their mom and dad. They'll want to blame them down at the schoolhouse. They'll want to blame it on the government. But you look at Adam and Eve, they was in a perfect environment, and they still messed up. And we try to place blame here, there, and yonder anymore, but look at these 2 people, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden, and they still had an evil influence pull up to them, and they bucked God and went the other direction. How you look at these 2, had it made. But can't you see God? I mean, here's Adam and Eve. They failed. Eve sinned first, then Adam sinned. Hey, they was even walking around out there naked to begin with. Hey, they didn't see no wrong in anything. I mean, everything was perfect then. But look what happened when the devil came to them over there and deceived them. But can't you see God and His mercy and His grace? He comes walking through the garden and says, Adam, where are you? Hey, He knows where Adam was at. Right. You know why God said that? He wanted Adam to know right where he is at. Hey, God knows what they had done. But can't you imagine God coming through that garden in His mercy and grace? And get over to about Genesis chapter number 3. And He begins to tell Adam and Eve how He's going to send His Son into this world. He's going to send a Savior for the whole world. You know, that was the first promise that was made to Adam and Eve, that God's Son was going to come. Hey, they messed up in the garden. But can't you imagine God slipping off over in that garden and taking 2 little old lambs? He slips over off in the garden somewhere on them 2 little old lambs, probably cuts their throat and lets that blood drain out for a sacrifice. But don't you see the second change or a God of another change right there? How God took the skins from them animals and put them upon Adam and Eve for clothing. Right. Hey man, He's a God of another change this morning. Here's the first 2 people ever created, messed up. But God showed them grace and mercy early on and showed what kind of God He was. Hey, there's 2 that was in a perfect environment. Still messed up, and God come to them and said, I love you. Hey, you can go on over there in the book of Genesis just a few chapters more and find a man by the name of Noah. Hey, Noah was a man that found grace in the eyes of God. One man in the whole world found grace in his eyes back during that time. Hey, Noah's day was a wicked time. They went crazy. There was a population outbreak. People doing everything that was right in their own eyes, but this one man. Here's old man Noah begins to build that ark. Can't you imagine them laughing and mocking at him all the time? Built on that ark for 120 years because God told him there was something getting ready to happen. It's going to rain. Hey, they'd never seen it rain before. Old Noah kept building, they kept laughing at him, and eventually one day, God told him to take him and his family in that ark. Man, they went in and God shut the door. And it began to rain, that water began to come up on that ark. Hey man, they were in a safe place. They were in with God. Hey, nobody couldn't open that door but God. It was shut. Hey, they got in that ark. God took them through the storm. They got through the storm. Hey, they landed on Mount Ararat. And I'm talking about God's man right here, Noah. He comes out with his family. They begin to worship God. Then something happens to this man by the name of Noah. Remember, Noah made a vineyard over there. And Noah got drunk. Hey, I'm talking about God's man. The one that got him through the flood. The one that got him to the other side that believed God. Then came out worshiping. Hey, old Noah had a few skeletons in his closet. Hey, you know, we just need to look at ourselves this morning. You know, I'm not trying to discourage anybody, but most of us has got a few skeletons, got some dark times in our lives. We've got things we may not want anybody to know about, rebellion and different things like that. But ain't you glad God's a God of a second chance? Hey, when I was studying and looking at this week, I thought, man, I'll title this message, A God of a Second Chance, but I got to looking at my own life. Hey, I've had more than 2 chances. I've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many could I go and count on? And I got to thinking, He's not a God of a second chance, but He's God of another chance. He's a God that will continue to walk with us. Hey, old Noah was a man that got drunk over there, but he found grace in the eyes of God. God give him another chance. God give him another day, give him another opportunity to do something for him. Hey, we talked about old Jonah there, talked about Noah. Look at another man there early in Genesis, Abraham. Hey, man, a lot of folks say, I'd like to be like Abraham. Man, I'd like to have Abraham's faith. But you remember there was time Abraham decided him and Sarah was going to go down to Egypt. Hey, Abraham made a big mistake before he got down to Egypt.
He got to thinking when him and Sarah was going down there, probably got to looking at her. And looked over and said, Sarah, man, you're beautiful. Got to thinking a little bit more. He said, when we get down to Egypt, you're so pretty. I'm afraid them Egyptians may try to take you away from me and kill me. He looked at Sarah and said, when we get down there, I want you to tell them you're my sister. Hey, Abraham messed up and told a lie right there. You know, a lot of folks think, well, it's all right to tell a little lie here and there. It may make things easier. Hey, God knows every lie we've told. He knows every time we've been deceitful. Every time we've had some deception in our lives, God knows about it. You know, we push them little old things under the rug like they ain't nothing. You know, Solomon said it was them little foxes that get us, them little things that we know that we don't think nothing about. Hey, old Abraham told a lie. Then you look at Abraham's life a little bit farther. You remember Abraham even got ahead of God one time. You remember Abraham and Sarah didn't have no children. And you know, Abraham had done been told, man, that he was going to have these children and they were going to be the children of promise, but he still didn't have any children. Remember, he got ahead of God. He went into Sarah's handmaid, a woman by the name of Hagar, and lay with her. And you remember there was a son came out of that by the name of Ishmael. And you know, God promised that Ishmael would be a great nation, but he wasn't the promised one. He wasn't going to be the seed of Israel. You know, Ishmael's line was that wild bunch the Bible talks about. He'd be a wild child. That's where we see a lot of this crazy stuff coming right now from the Middle East out of that line. Right. But you look at right here what happened. There was a child came out of this. You know, he decided he was going to get ahead of God. You know, I don't believe God was pleased with that. But you know, look what God done for Abraham. He gave him another chance. You know, there was a time right there that Abraham was up in years. Sarah was 90 years old. God came by and put a sparkle in Sarah's eye one night. Told Abraham and Sarah that she was going to have a child. I mean, she was way past childbearing age. But can't you imagine there in a few days, Sarah may have been sitting out front of that tent knitting a few baby clothes. Man, some of these women come by and begin to look at her and say, what are you doing? Say, I'm going to have a child. They probably thought she was crazy. Abraham probably out somewhere building a cradle for a child and men laughing at him. But what happened there as time went on? There was a baby come into their life by the name of Isaac. Hey, that was the seed that God was looking for. Hey, he lied. He got ahead of God. But God gave this man by the name of Abraham another chance. Hey, man, we need to be like Abraham. Man, we need that second chance, another chance this morning. Even Abraham stumbled. God said, I'm going to give you another chance. You know, I'm afraid we get to the place a lot of times in our Christian life that we think we don't do any wrong. We don't do any sin. We think we get to the place of sainthood, but man, we need another chance a lot of times. Man, there's Abraham, the man of faith that led one of Israel's greatest leaders. Hey, you've got Jonah there, you've got Adam and Eve fell, but God gave them another chance in Abraham. Then you find the greatest leader that Israel ever had, a man by the name of Moses. Moses had some problems. Hey, you look early on there in Moses' life. I mean, we know how everybody knows the story of Moses, how he was born, how he was brought up over there in royalty. God had a plan for him. Hey, God let the devil's crowd raise that man up, let him pay his bills, let him educate him, let him feed him. But you remember when there was a time there when Moses got grown. You remember he seen a man kill one of their own, and Moses went out and murdered that man. Buried him in the sand, and Moses took off and hid out in the desert out there for 40 years. But you remember there was a time Moses was out there keeping the flock and seen something. Remember when he got to it, it was a burning bush. That's when Moses' life changed. There was another change. Remember that bush over there that spoke to Moses? It was God. Told Moses he had a job for him to do. Told him he had all them million Jews down there in bondage in Egypt, and he wanted them to lead them out. Hey, can you imagine the second change or another change that Moses got? Moses may have thought, well, God was done done with him after all he had done. Been out there 40 years in the wilderness, out there in the desert. Then here God comes through the burning bush and said, I've got a people I want you to deliver. Let me tell you something, Moses was probably the greatest leader you'll find. You imagine all he went through with all them Jews? Belly aching all the time, fussing at him. But man, Moses had a backbone. Went back down into Egypt, man, stood up down there to Pharaoh, all those plagues come. And finally that last one, man, that blood was applied. Put it up on the door, post over the door, and God said, when I come through and see the blood, I'll pass over you. And man, God said, I've got a job for you to do now, Moses. I want you to lead these people out of Egypt. Hey, led them down to the Dead Sea, and man, they come to a dead end there to begin with. Got down to the Red Sea, and the Red Sea didn't know what they was going to do, the Egyptians either. And man, God put that rod in his hand, told Moses what to do, Aaron, her holding his hands up. Man, it split that water. Hey, they went through on dry ground. Man, I believe, man, they just kept it going, all them millions of Jews. You know why that happened? God gave Moses another chance. Led them through the water, and they got through. God let them Egyptians go right into the sea and close the water up on them. Could you imagine that? All them millions of gallons of water on each side, them going through on dry ground. Hey, man, it's a God of another chance. You look at all these men in the Old Testament, you can flop over there and look at a man by the name of Samson. Hey, man, there's a lot of people wants to brag on Samson. But I'm going to tell you, there ain't a whole lot in Samson's life to brag about. Right. Hey, he was a powerful man, a strong man. But I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't instruct anybody to pattern their life after Samson. Hey, you look at the things that happened to that man. The Bible said he killed more in his death than his whole life. But the Bible don't so say how many he would have killed if he'd have stayed with God. Hey, he was a warrior. He was God's man. But I'd encourage all the young people, don't pattern your life after Samson. Hey, he had every opportunity in the world to get right with God. You'll study Samson's life, man, he'd carry on, he'd weep. He'd tell God he was going to get right, but he'd turn and run right back to that one sin that kept bringing him down. If Samson would ever got rid of that one sin, you say, what was it? It was women. He had a weakness. He couldn't run away from that. He couldn't get away from it. He wouldn't listen to God. You say, well, what happened to Samson? He got tied up with a woman by the name of Delilah. You remember the enemies kept wanting to know where his strength lied at. Never could figure it out. It was in his hair. It's where his strength was at. But he finally fell in love with this woman Delilah, but she was of the devil the whole time and he couldn't see through her. You remember she kept asking him several times where his strength was at and never would tell him. He'd tell her all these different things that they would do to him and it still wouldn't work. But finally he broke down and told her his strength was in his hair. You remember what happened to Samson? He got a haircut. And you know, you think about a man like Samson, man, he was a trained warrior. I mean, he was trained in the ways of fighting, trained in the ways of a soldier, had to be alert all the time watching what was going on around him. But could you imagine him laying down and not being alert enough to where his hair was cut off? You know what happened to him? God put him to sleep. And when God put him to sleep, that woman gave him a haircut that he'd never forget. Laid down in their laps, cut all his hair off. And man, his power was gone when she cut his hair off. You know what God pretty much done? He looked at Samson and said, I'm tired, I'm fed up with you playing games. You know, we got a lot of church people just playing church, playing games, going through the motions. Right. Just like Samson. I wonder a lot of times when God's going to look at some folks and say, well, I'm fed up. I'm going to cut your hair. Hey, you look what Samson lost when his hair was cut. Samson lost a precious thing to him. He lost Delilah. Hey, these young boys and girls better be careful who they made up with, who they run with, who they're going to date and things such as that. Hey, you may say, well, she looks prettier, he's handsome. You better be careful if they ain't got no God on them. They'll leave you sitting high and dry one day. They'll do you just like this woman does Samson. He lost some precious things. And you know, Samson lost his power with God. Hey, when she cut his hair, he raised up. Bible pretty much tells us he shook himself as he had at other times. But he had no power. Couldn't do anything. Hey, he lost all his strength, all the power he had as a warrior. Couldn't do as he did at other times. You know, even when his power was gone, they took him down and used him as an ox. Took him down to that old mill and made him grind every day. You know, I've heard a lot of preachers say, well, they didn't think Samson was probably real big or anything, just had strength. I don't know. But I believe if Samson was here today and like he was before all that happened, he could probably walk out in this parking lot and pick up the front end of any car out there, according to this book. Carried gates off and different things from cities at different times. Powerful, strong man. God put his hand upon him. But you know, the Bible tells us they poked his eyes out. You know, the Bible tells us where there's no vision, the people perish. Hey, we're living in a day like we've got our eyes poked out. Right. We're living in a day, man, that people's dying all around us and going to hell because we don't have any vision. Can't you imagine old Samson, man, every morning them taking him down and hooking him up and telling him to grind? Hey, he went in a circle around that mill every day. I wonder how deep that circle got around that thing. You imagine old Samson out there every day grinding, turning that wheel. Probably had thoughts going through his mind every day. Probably thinking about, man, how I used to fight. How I used to be one of the judges down in Israel. How I used to be a warrior. Hey, there's probably nobody out there bragging on him then. His people were in bondage. Nobody to defend them. All that going through his mind every day. You know, he still had some ability to work. But he didn't have the ability to do the things that mattered for God anymore at that point. He lost his power with God. But can't you imagine maybe them bringing Samson in one night after he's grinded all day and walked around out there, coming in and sitting down and putting his hand up on his head and feeling something start to grow again. Can't you imagine Samson maybe looking and saying, is this possible? Is this going to happen? This hair's growing back. It's coming back. You know, I don't really care what happened to Samson, but he'd never be like he was before, even if the hair grew back. Right. For one reason, they poked his eyes out. He could never be the way he was before. He couldn't see. He couldn't do things the way he used to do. You know, I believe Samson knew he'd never be the way he was before, but I wonder if he got to wondering, well, God, let me do one more thing before I die. Let me do one more thing for you before I die. You know, I believe in the grace of God, but you know the grace of God will not always erase the consequences or the complications of your sin. God will forgive you, but there's still going to be some things, sometimes going to be some consequences from your sin that's still going to be there. It'll hinder you from doing some things. You think about that, Samson had his eyes poked out. He had to cry with no eyes. Could you imagine that, crying with no eyes? Samson had to realize he'd never be a judge again. He'd never be a great warrior again. I believe Samson began to realize, man, I just don't want to die like this. But you know, the God of another chance said, son, just keep grinding and let that hair grow. And when the time's come, I'm going to ring your bell one more time. Hey, God still had a plan for this boy. Even after all he had done, even after him forsaking God, God still had a plan for him. God said there's going to be another chance. You know, I believe God looked at him and said, this thing's just going to be about over in just a minute. You imagine they was having that big feast that day, and they brought Samson in to make fun of him. Brought him into that big building they was in to make fun of Samson. They was going to make sport out of him. Can't you imagine Samson probably looking over at that little old boy there that day and saying, could you take me and let me find the pillars, just put my hands on them. Hey, could you imagine Samson getting his hands up on them pillars? The Bible said he bound. You imagine how, he had to be strongest man had ever been to do what he done. Put his hands on them pillars. Can't you imagine him probably telling that little old boy, I'm going to give you just a minute or two start. Get out of here. There's going to be a big pile up. Can't you imagine Samson grabbing them posts and begin to bow down and pull? Hey, if you're ever going to have power, you're going to have to bow down and pray this morning. Ever have power with God, that's where it's going to come from. Can't you imagine Samson? God just giving him another chance. And he pulled that building down on all them people. Hey, I don't believe God let Samson suffer. I believe he let a big piece of that hit him right in the head right off the bat. And he was to be with God that quick. God give him another chance. Hey, you look at one of another greatest kings that Israel ever had by the name of David. Hey, David was a man that committed adultery with Bathsheba. Hey, he had her husband killed out on the battlefield. And you know, God had to punish David. There was a child came out of the adulterous act, and God let that child die. But God still gave that man another chance. Hey, we write people off a lot of times. Hey, you get over in the New Testament, you can find example after example after example that God give people another chance. You remember a man by the name of Peter? And let me say, when you talk about Peter, you need to learn failure is not final when you mess up. Hey, Peter was a man that messed up big time. Hey, you remember they took Jesus to the cross and crucified him? Done everything they could do to humiliate him, killed him, put him in the tomb. And you remember when all this was going on, man, these disciples didn't know what to think. Hey, they were after these disciples trying to kill him. You remember they come and find Peter warming by the fire of the enemy. And they begin to ask, do you know Jesus? Was you one of them? And he denies him. Says he didn't know nothing about him, didn't know who he was. Bible says Peter even cursed during that time. Hey, Peter denied Christ. And Peter began to get discouraged. You know, I guess Peter kind of felt like, well, God's put me up on a shelf now. Hey, has anybody in this building ever denied Christ? You know, you can do that without doing it with your lips. You can deny Christ a lot of times just by the way you live before a lost and dying world. Hey, we're supposed to be light. We're supposed to be salt. We're supposed to be light in this world. We're supposed to shine in a lost and dying world. Here's old Peter. Can you imagine all the disciples? They're discouraged. They're sitting in the room there. Jesus has died, and they think all this has probably been in vain. Don't really understand what's going on. Then Mary comes in. Looks at the disciples and said, I've seen him. He's alive. Can't you? They look at Mary and said, well, how do you know he's alive? The way he said my name, he said Mary. Can't you imagine her looking at Peter and saying, don't be discouraged, he mentioned you. Said he's coming to see you, Peter. Can't you imagine them disciples sitting there not really understanding what's going on? But you know, there was another change getting ready to come Peter's way. Can't you imagine there Jesus is coming to talk to the disciples after he's rose from the dead? Stays with them there a few days, then he goes back to heaven. And then something happens over in the book of Acts. You know, the book of Acts is a transition book. You know, it goes from law to grace when we get over the book of Acts. And something happens over there on the day of Pentecost. Can't you imagine maybe some of these women or some of these men sitting around talking and wondering, well, maybe who's going to preach today on the day of Pentecost? Man, they may have had it in their mind, well, maybe John's going to preach. He's the one that he loved. Or maybe Matthew, he was the faithful one. Or maybe Thomas is going to preach. He's not doubting anymore. But can't you imagine one of these old big rough fishermen comes through the crowd? Some of these ladies maybe get to looking at him and say, well, he's the one that denied Christ. He's the one that cursed. Can't you imagine that big old rough fisherman coming through the crowd? Nobody's called on him, but he's got plugged in from another world. And that big rough fisherman by the name of Peter steps back and said, the Word of God said so. Man, can't you imagine Peter stepping back and saying, the Word of God says. Hey, on the day of Pentecost, man, there was a church birthed into existence. Man, on the day of Pentecost, there was over 5,000 saved. And can't you look this morning and say, well, he was a God of another chance. Man, he took a nobody like Peter that had denied him, a nobody like Peter that had cursed him, and stuck him out on the day of Pentecost and let him preach one of the most powerful messages that's ever been preached. Yeah. Souls were saved, the church got birthed into existence just because he's a God of another chance. Hey, we write people off a lot of times. We cut them off and put them up on a shelf. But this Bible tells me that all are sinners and all have come short of the grace of God. Right. Hey, the Bible tells us down in Proverbs 24 and verse number 16, for a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again. Hey, number 7 is the number of completion. Bible said a just man will fall 7 times, but he'll get back up. Hey, man, when we fall and get down, we need to get up and clean ourselves off and get to going for God again. Right. Hey, we push verses like that in Proverbs off and forget about it. Hey, God knows we're going to fall. He knows we're going to mess up. Hey, God knows when we're going to mess up every time, but ain't you glad He's a God of mercy and grace? And He's a God that says, I'll give you another chance. Hey, you ever just stop and look back over your life? Hey, man, they was Adam and Eve. They was Jonah. We talked about Moses, Abraham, David, Peter. All these men, we act like they're bigger in life. But they were still men of the flesh and messed up. And God said, I'm going to give you another chance. Hey, I failed a whole lot more than 7 times. And God still comes back and says, I love you just like you are. But we need to be careful, though. There's a lot of folks, man, that's done like Samson. God took Samson out to early grave because of things he done. You imagine what Samson could have done if he'd have stayed with God. God would have probably left him there and just kept letting him fight. But God got fed up with him and said, it's enough. I wonder how many people God's got fed up with and said, that's enough. I'm talking about saved people. Right. I believe there's a lot of folks in the graveyard that God could have really done something with, but they wouldn't let loose of that one sin, that one thing that just brings them down. And God said, that's enough. I can't use you no more. And He took them on out of here. You know, I'm glad He's a God of a second chance. You ought to think back over your life this morning just for a minute as we stand at our feet. We're not even going to have any music this morning. I want you to bow your heads for just a minute. I'm not going to tarry in a minute. You ought to think back over your life this morning. How many chances has God given you? Sure, you're saved by God's grace. But how many times have we failed Him like a lot of these men did? But God still reaches that hand out and says, I love you. I want to forgive you, and I want to give you another chance. I want you to keep going. Said a just man falls 7 times, but get back up. Hey, when you fall, don't get down and out. Get up and clean yourself off and keep going for God. Hey, this altar's open right now. There might be somebody that just wants to step out and say, Lord, I want to thank you for giving me that chance when you saved me. Give me another chance and not let me die and go to hell. They might be one in the building just want to step out and just simply thank you this morning for saving you, giving you another chance so you didn't have to die and go to hell. Think about all them times ever since you've been saved. He's given you another chance. Forgive you of your sins. Give you another chance to come to the house of God. Give you another chance to go back home and spend time with your family. Hey, He's a God of another chance. Anybody need to step out this morning and come down and talk to Him? This altar's open. We're not going to tarry for just a minute. But He's a good God this morning. may be going through something right now. He's a God of another chance. He'll give you another chance right on and on and on. He's a good God. Anybody this morning before we pray? Anybody? Father, I want to thank you this morning for this opportunity. I want to thank you for the good attention this morning. Lord, it seems like folks has listened. And I pray, dear God, there have been some things said that be a little help to somebody, a little bit of encouragement to go another day, another mile. I want to thank you for helping me a few minutes this morning. Dear God, you know how we felt all morning this morning. You know how our body's been. And I want to thank you for helping us just a little while. I really needed you this morning, dear God, more than I have in a few days. And thank you for helping us, strengthen us. And I pray for each one in this building. I pray you'd encourage them to go another day, another mile, and help them to realize, dear God, if we fall down, we just need to get back up. Get back up and clean ourselves off and encourage ourselves, encourage others around us. I thank you for loving us. Thank you for each one that's in this building. And dear God, I pray for our nation this morning. Dear God, we're in a mess right now. Seems like every way you look. But dear God, it's not caught you off guard. You know all this was going to happen. You know it was coming. And I pray you just take control, dear God, of our leaders, dear God. Take control of this country. Dear God, I pray we could see you coming back pretty soon, dear God, and take care of everything that's going on. Dear God, we need you. Dear God, I'm longing to be able to go to heaven. Dear God, this whole world, dear God, is getting to be a place anymore that I just don't seem like I fit in here much anymore. And I pray, dear God, you'd help us. Dear God, we could see you coming back. And dear God, we could see your Son step out and say, come up hither. And dear God, I pray you'd help each one this week. Give them a good week. Give them a safe week. And dear God, I thank you for loving me most of all. Thank you for Calvary. Thank you for my family this morning. I pray you'd help them and bless them. And be with each family in this building. Keep each one safe on the highways, dear God, as we go our separate ways in just a minute. And thank you again for showing up this morning and helping us just a little while. Dear God, I really appreciate it today, you helping us. Because in Jesus' sweet and precious holy name we pray. Amen and amen.